I'm Alexis.
And I'm Tiffany, and we're the hosts of Legit KidLit, a video series where we get to see into the secret and silly lives of authors and illustrators.
We love to celebrate and promote books, but most of all, we want to say hey to all you readers out there trying to find that right book for you. We hope that you can find some new reads after today.
Episode 24 is an exciting one. Today's guest is Frances O'Roark Dowell, beloved author of many books for tweens and teens. Some of her most notable books, Dovey Cove, Shooting the Moon, the Sam the Man series, and The Class. Her most recent book is How to Build a Story, or The Big What If, and is a perfect resource for aspiring writers of any age. Get ready for some fun.
Everyone, this is Frances. I'm really happy to be here. I love Tiffany and Alexis. We are Twitter friends, and of course I love anyone who's talking with kids about books and getting kids to be more enthusiastic readers. And I just feel like I am here with my people. I'm talking to you from Durham, North Carolina, where I live with my husband Clifton, my younger son, Will, who's a senior in high school, and my older son, Jack, who's a senior in college, is home right now. He's going back to school here in a week or so. And I also live here with my amazing cockapoo, Travis, who's about to turn 13. He's a very good dog.
Welcome, Frances. You are a champion for readers and teachers and librarians, and we are just beyond excited to share you with our viewers. Let's start with a glimpse into how to build a story, or the big what if. Share some of your favorite bits of advice from this book for aspiring writers.
Well, this is How to Build a Story, or The Big What If, a book you should buy if just the amazing illustrations. My illustrator is Stacy Ebert, and she's just incredible. So it's a book about how to write a story, one story from beginning to end. I wrote this book after years of doing writing workshops with kids, and what I realized is they were so good at getting stories started and so bad at finishing them, as was I as a young writer and sometimes as an older writer. Although I have rules for myself now. If I'm going to actually start a story, I have to get to a certain point before I give up. But I just know so many kids who have drawers full of 2 amazing pages. And so I wanted to develop a workshop that would help the kids I was working with get from the beginning of that story all the way to the end of a first draft. And that's what How to Build a Story is all about. There's some writing advice, particularly at the beginning, before we start. Once the book gets going, it really is, all right, here's step 1, step 2, step 3, and I walk you all the way through the process from beginning to end, from generating ideas for a story to finishing that first draft, and then doing the work that a lot of people really hate, although I love, which is revising. At the beginning, I do give some of my favorite writing advice, and that would include to be prepared to revise, to not expect to get it perfect the right time, to pick up your favorite book by your very favorite author, the book that you've read 10,000 times and could pretty much recite, and realize that book started out as a really bad first draft. The book that you love started out in a very different place, because nobody gets it right the first time. And I actually think this is great life advice, not just great writing advice, that a lot of times the first time we try to do something, we mess up. We don't get it exactly the way we want. And writing can be really frustrating when you're writing a story, because you're creating something that didn't exist before. You are making something completely new. You're using your imagination, your language, your writing skills, but before you actually wrote this story down, it didn't exist in the world. And that's actually kind of hard work. So you're going to mess up. You're not going to get it right the first time, and that's absolutely fine. Your favorite writers who write the most brilliant books don't get it right the first time. They write horrible first drafts, or what I call worst first drafts. So because I meet some writers, including young writers, who actually their first drafts, they come out pretty good. More common is people who write first drafts that they're unsatisfied with. And what happens sometimes when we do this, especially when you're young, and this is what I did when I was young, I just thought it meant I couldn't write stories. And I've always written poetry and poetry has come more easily for me. But I wanted to write stories. But I struggled, and so I figured I just didn't have that talent. And it's really writing a good story. I wouldn't even put a percentage. How much of it is talent? You've got to have a little talent, but more than talent, it's practice and willingness to make mistakes and mess up and get feedback. So my big advice is accept the fact that your first draft's going to be your worst draft and that you have to revise and kind of embrace that, because it means you've got so many chances to get the story that you want to tell on the page. It doesn't, if you don't get it the first time, you'll get it the fifth time. That has been my experience. So that is my, I feel like I am the spokesperson for imperfection. I'm a huge imperfectionist, and I think that's very helpful when you're a writer, to know that you're not going to get a perfect first draft. You're not going to get a perfect final draft either, by the way, which is a little disappointing, but you can get a pretty good final draft. You can write a story that people are going to want to read. So that's my big advice. Lots of drafts, lots of revising. Don't expect to get it right the first time.
We would love to do a writing exercise with you. We have paper and pencils ready. Can you walk us through it?
Okay, here is my A1, let's get started, let's get going writing exercise, which I call the big what if, which is also the subtitle. And this is a way of generating story ideas. Now, when I do workshops, sometimes, when I do workshops, most of the kids are there because they love to write, and they have lots and lots of ideas. But there's always a couple kids, one who are there because they don't love to write, but their parents want them to love to write so they can get into college. And for these kids, I started this exercise. I came up with this exercise, which actually works really well with everybody, even the kids who have lots and lots of ideas, because it helps them focus a little bit. But I call it the big what if, because what I want you to do is come up with a list of what if questions. And they can be fantastical, highly imaginative. What if I could fly? What if I woke up tomorrow morning and I was invisible? What if it turned out my mother was queen, but she was in hiding? My family was actually in exile. What if I got on the bus tomorrow and no one talked to me? So they can also be kind of worrisome questions. And I think the reason this exercise works well is because humans are kind of what-if creatures, right? We think about the future, and we think about it in wonderful, what if my life was everything I wanted to be? What if I were this? What if I were that? But also we think about it as a way of anticipating possible problems. What if I didn't do my math homework tonight? Would there be ramifications for that? That kind of thing. Or what if I'm late for this important meeting? So we think in terms of what if questions all the time. So it's not hard to come up with them. And so part one of this exercise that we are going to do together, the three of us, and everyone who's watching, I hope, is to come up with a list of 6 to 8 what if questions. They can be fantastical, they can be realistic, they can be highly anxiety induced, whatever's on your mind. Let's shoot for 6 to 8, and let's take about 3 minutes. Okay, I'll set the timer, and then I'll pop back on. So see you in a minute. See you in 3. All right, my dears, our timer has rung. Time is up, and as I look at myself in my iPad, when I write, I do this, and so you can see all my gray roots. They're real. Not for much longer, please. So I always walk out of a writing session, and everyone's looking at me, like my family, like, what? what's wrong with you? And it's just, I do that. So anyway, what if questions? Who wants to share their list?
I can go first. I think I got at least 20 questions. So I just kind of kept going. Some of them are kind of connected. So here are a few. What if I couldn't read anymore? And then, what if I found a dragon? What if we lost power for a month? What if I won the lottery? What if I wasn't a teacher? I don't like that one. What if I could control my emotions? And then, as I'm doing this, my daughter is playing a video game, and she mentioned something about being able to communicate through farts. So, I said, what if we could communicate through farts?
Okay, here's mine. What if we had to wear masks for the rest of our lives? What if we had a woman president? What if sweets became a healthy part of our diet? What if Alexis and I became co-authors? What if Alexis and I could do legit KidLit professionally? What if we decorated our houses with only things from nature? And what if my kids' electronics were taken away forever?
You guys, those are so good. And it reminded me, listening to you, thinking, I love those what if questions. I'd like to write about several of them that you brought up, and that sometimes happens in workshops, and then people have to say, could I write about your what if question? And the great thing is these what if questions. So say if I, this idea of like not having power for a month, I'm not obsessed. I think that would be overstating it. But I do think about, what if we lost power? What if the grid just went poof and we didn't have power anymore? And that interests me. It's like, how would we survive? What survival skills do we have? And what kind of community would come together in my neighborhood, et cetera, et cetera. So I would write a really different story. I think, Alexis, was that your idea? Or was it Tiffany's? I'm sorry. But if I said, can I borrow that? Can I take that? You could give it to me, because we would write really different stories about it. But that's one of the beauties of sharing the what if question list with each other, is because we get ideas, and it's not really stealing, it's sharing, and it's nice to ask, though. All right, mine is, I am very slow, by the way. I'm a very slow writer in general, and so whenever I do writing exercises with students, they just mock me mercilessly. They're like, that's all you wrote? I'm like, yeah. All right, so what if my house burned down? That's always like a holiday concern with extra electric lights and trees and whatever. What if I were to wake up tomorrow morning and I were 11 again? I have to say, I say this as someone who feels like I'm always 11, that I never stopped being 11, but what if I actually were 11 again? What if I had daughters instead of sons? I think about this a lot, particularly, well, we won't go into that, but I do wonder about that. And I wasn't always a great daughter, so sometimes I think that, I would get myself, and that would, I would deserve myself. Okay. What if I had two exceptional skill sets? Like I was a great singer, but also a gifted physicist, and I really had to choose one to devote my life to. Which one would I choose? What if I accidentally tweeted something I didn't intend that was offensive? I didn't intend it to be offensive. I didn't know I was being offensive, but people were offended by it. And that's such a contemporary, up-to-the-minute kind of problem. And what if I had never married and I actually lived as a hermit? That's a very COVID-19 kind of question, I think, for some of us. I know I have friends who live by themselves, and I've offered to trade. And I shouldn't make light of that, because I know that there are people during this time who really are feeling like they don't have enough human connection right now. Some of us have that and wonder, what would it be like to be a hermit? Just wondering. That just came up. So, okay, we've got this list of questions, and the next thing we're going to do with them is look over them and go, of these questions, which one interests me the most? Now, you may end up like, okay, I've got 3 questions that really just ring a little bell for me, or make me just, there's something in my brain that kind of pops when I get to it. But try it if you can, and do this really quickly. Read over your list. Which question interests you the most? Which question, as they say, resonates with you the most? Okay, so I'm going to give you like 5 seconds to do that. Okay, which question did you pick? We'll start with Tiffany.
Ooh, okay. I had 2 that I really, really liked and wanted to kind of go forth with, but I know we can only choose one, so I went with the one that I am most passionate about right now, and that's my kids getting their electronics taken away, and not having those again.
All right, so the one that I thought would be fun to write about, that's not too heavy, would be What If I Found a Dragon? Wow. I am really excited to start writing this story, and you have made me just motivated. So I hope our viewers are also motivated and are ready to continue working on a story. And then I'm going to keep going through your advice. Thank you. The next thing that we want to talk about is another book that you recently wrote called The Class. This was a very unique novel in that it had many perspectives throughout the story. So can you tell us, why did you choose to write in so many different voices?
Well, and I can't remember how I got the idea, but when I got the idea, I'm like, oh yes, I'm doing this, because that's what I love. I love characters. I would be really happy to write books that were just character sketches that had no plot. And if I could, I would, but my editor, she won't let me. I've tried it. She's like, no. And I kind of tried it with The Class. I love this idea of all these different characters. There's 20 students in the class, and they're all in the same situation, right? They're all in this classroom. They're all witnessing the same events, but their take on things is of course different, and not necessarily 180 degrees different, but everyone's has a different pair of glasses to look, different set of lenses to experience, that they see these events through. And I loved that idea. And also, what was fun with it is playing around with some of the stereotypes and cliches. I mean, so if you're in a room with 20 people and you know them a little bit because you're taking classes with them and discussions with them and what have you, you form judgments, and not necessarily in a negative way, but so about this kid Garrett, that he plays football and he doesn't talk very much, and but he's smart. He seems, but he's a jock, so how smart can he? And all these things, and it's sort of, and we're not even that aware all the time that we're making these judgments and forming opinions about people based on not very much information. And so I love the idea of taking these characters and going deeper with them. I did need to come up with the plot, just because, again, my editor, she's mean. She makes me do these things. So, but that was actually the hardest part about writing the book, in some ways, was coming up with a story that could be told through one character after another, each character pushing that story along, advancing the plot. That was the challenge of the book, but just the idea of going deep. And so this kid, and one of my favorite characters in the story is Henry, who's is maybe ADHD. He's really hyper. He's really smart. And he's the kind of kid that, if you weren't friends with him, you would just be like, oh man, Henry, he's such a pain in the butt. And it would kind of end with that. But it's like, but what's really going on in Henry's mind? Or Becca, who's kind of that always wants to be the teacher's pet. We think we know who she is, but we don't. We don't know what's going on in her house. And this, we don't know what's going on with her parents, with her siblings. There's so much in a classroom situation that we don't know, that we don't have the time to know, and people have their secrets. And so that was, I loved that, going into each character and trying to make each one of them a real person. It drives me crazy if I read a novel and the characters don't feel like people that I might run into in the real world. So so that was, and it was so much fun to write. I loved writing it.
Which character would you say is the most like you from the class, and which one is the least like you?
The character who's the most like me is definitely Ellie, and she's the only recurring character in the story. And she's the one, she is taking notes on all the members of the class. She's the observer, she's the writer. She's also an army brat, which I was, and I guess still am. And her father has just left the service. And so she's new in school, and which I often was new in school. And so she's very much like me in that way. And just that she, up until this point in her life, she's always made friends really easily. And I always made friends really easily. And I have to say, even, it wasn't until I went to 3 different high schools. And high school was the hardest time for me. And this is a 6th grade class. And it's the first time that Ellie has walked into a classroom situation or school situation where she did automatically make new friends. And she's trying to figure out what's going on with that. The character who is least like me, I mentioned Henry earlier, and probably Henry, and just that kind of brain, that kind of ricocheting brain, and he's got all these thoughts, and I maybe in the way that so I'm saying that and going, is this right? And I think in some ways yes, because I'm very focused and able to sustain. I'm able to sit in a chair for a really long time, and as a kid that's all I did. It's not true, but I read a lot, and Henry is not that kid at all, but he is very verbal and he loves playing with words. So actually I'm kind of like Henry too, I guess. And I'm sure a Freudian or some psychologist could say, well, they're all extensions of you, and I suppose that's true. I'm looking at the cover. And I would love to say there are a couple mean girls. There are a couple mean guys, but as someone who went through a mean girl experience in 6th grade, I would love to say that actually I was nothing like I'm nothing like those mean girls. But I have spent a lot of my life not working to be kind and compassionate because I recognize those mean girls in me. Not so much now. But when I was younger, sometimes girls were mean to me, and sometimes I was mean. So sadly, I feel like I have more in common with them than I wish I did. But Henry's ricocheting brain, that I don't have. So and that, in fact, was one of the reasons it was really fun to write him, to try to understand him, because I know kids like Henry, and trying to figure out what's going on inside of that head. That was really, really fascinating to try to create that character. And what's interesting to me, because the Henrys of the world can be exasperating. I think that's the word I'm saying here. How many people I've heard from who really loved Henry, which makes me happy. It's like Henry's getting some love.
I think that having so many characters that students can identify with will probably make that book much more, maybe memorable for them, because they can really find themselves. So I think that was a great thing that you did. What was the most enjoyable part of writing the class?
I think it was coming up with each new character. So I started with Ellie, and it was kind of like an interesting chain of events. It's like, okay, who comes next, and who comes out of that scenario, who comes out of the following one, and so, and with writing a book like this, I'm also a quilt maker. That's not something I do professionally, but it's something I do for fun. And with quilts, you think a lot about contrast. You think a lot about rhythm, and it's funny how that's true when you're writing a novel as well. It's like how do you set the pace? How do you keep things interesting? And you can do that with speeding things up, or having a quieter part of the story, or by having contrast. And in quilts, it's like you have contrasting colors, and in the class, it's like, well, you have contrasting characters. If everyone was the same, that wouldn't be interesting at all. To have a good quilt, you want a lot of different not so much textures, but patterns, colors, what have you. And so coming up with the next person. Who's going to add to the story? Who's going to bring interest to the story? Who's going to have a different point of view on what's going on? That I love doing that. Once my editor said I had to have a plot and I couldn't just have a collection of short stories, figuring that out, I enjoyed the puzzle of that. The story has to do, there are a couple of different things going on, from a boy who was in the class at the very beginning of the school year and then is gone, and it feels a little bit mysterious. The teacher, Mrs. Herrera, is a little vague about where he's gone. And then suddenly he starts showing up again, but he's not back in the class, but there are sightings of him around school. So that becomes sort of a mystery that the members of the class are trying to figure out.
Are you doing any virtual visits this year, and how can educators or librarians get in touch with you?
I am doing virtual visits. I love doing it, and I do all sorts of different things. I can do workshops. One of the fun things that I did earlier this year was an extended 3-week how to build a story workshop with some 6th grade classes, which I really enjoyed doing. But I do one-day visits. I talk about the writing process. I talk about my books. I'm very happy to do that. And if you want to get in touch with me, just email me, and that's easy to do. You can email me at FM, as in Frances Marie, FM Dowell, Dowell, all right, fmdowell@gmail.com. And just let me know what you're interested in, and we can do a back and forth and figure something out. But I love talking to kids. I love talking about writing. And in a weird way, it's like I love talking about writing more than I love talking about my books, because I've written my book and I'm happy to answer questions about books and discuss books. But I feel like part of my, a big part of what I feel like I'm on earth to do is to get kids excited about writing. I think creative writing is so good for the spirit and the soul, but also it's a way of making you a stronger writer in general. And having good writing skills is important. It's important for thinking. It's important for doing well in school. It's a skill that can take you pretty far. So I love talking to kids about writing and encouraging them to write and helping them become better writers. So please get in touch if you want to do something. If you want to chat, I'd love to. And so anytime. And I am working on a book right now, but I can always make a little time. And the time that we're talking during COVID, I don't go out much, so I've got some time to visit with students, and I'd love to do it.
That's really wonderful, and all of us teachers say thank you for dedicating time to helping us. We really enjoyed writing with you and learning more and being more motivated and just being in awe of you and your ideas and your brilliance. So thank you for joining us on Legit KidLit. We look forward to reading more of your books.
To all our wonderful readers, we hope you enjoyed our show and are inspired now to pick up some new and exciting books.